The fuel gauge needle pointed to 0. December 1944. Belgium's frozen hills held secrets that would reshape history. A Tiger tank sat motionless, steel beast silenced not by enemy fire, not by artillery shells, but by something far simpler. Empty fuel tanks. Around this mechanical giant lay dozens of others. Abandoned war machines scattered across narrow country roads. Each one a testament to industrial arithmetic gone wrong. What visitors see today as museum pieces were once Germany's deadliest weapons. In that bitter winter, they became monuments to futility, paralyzed by the absence of a single liquid: gasoline. This was the fate that awaited Kampfgruppe Piper. SS Colonel Jochen Piper commanded Germany's elite spearhead. His men believed they carried the Reich's salvation. Instead, they discovered America's terrible abundance. The numbers tell the story. Piper's force captured 50,000 gallons at a small depot called Hansfeld. His soldiers cheered like men granted a miracle. Victory seemed within reach. Hours later, they watched American engineers torch 2 million gallons at Stavelot. Flames reached 100 feet into the winter sky. Black smoke marked the funeral pyre of German hopes. What seemed like salvation revealed itself as a drop in an ocean. What Germany hoarded like treasure, America burned without hesitation. The contrast cut deeper than any blade. This moment sealed more than one battle's outcome. It marked the death of the Third Reich itself. But understanding this requires looking beyond the battlefield, into factories and oil fields, refineries and convoy routes, the desperate mathematics of modern war, where gallons mattered more than courage, where logistics decided fate more than tactics. Summer 1944 painted a grim picture across the German Reich. Allied bombers targeted more than cities and military bases. They struck at Germany's lifeblood itself. Synthetic fuel plants crumbled under relentless bombardment. Facilities at Leuna once produced hundreds of thousands of tons monthly. Now they operated at barely 10% capacity. The mighty Luftwaffe grounded aircraft daily. Not from pilot shortages. Their fuel tanks ran dry. Training hours for new pilots plummeted from 200 to 60. Elite squadrons that once terrorized Europe now sat idle on airfields. Engines silent. Dreams of air superiority evaporating like morning mist. Germany's surface fleet remained anchored in harbors. Immobile steel monuments to vanished petroleum. Even U-boats, those Atlantic predators, adopted snorkels to conserve every precious liter of diesel. Civilian life reflected this collapse. Private automobiles vanished from roads by 1942. Farmers returned to horse-drawn equipment. Families rationed fuel to individual drops. Gestapo agents investigated black market theft of single liters as acts of treason. The Reich that once promised endless expansion now narrowed to desperate hoarding of dwindling reserves. Across the Atlantic stood a different reality entirely. America refined 1.8 billion barrels annually in 1944, 50 times Germany's total production, including captured Romanian fields. East Texas oil fields alone outproduced the entire Axis combined. This abundance flowed through logistical marvels that defied German comprehension. Operation Pluto snaked beneath the English Channel, a pipeline delivering 1 million gallons daily from Britain to France, an underwater lifeline feeding Allied armies. The Red Ball Express thundered day and night, 6,000 trucks hauling 12,000 tons every 24 hours. Each vehicle burned fuel constantly, yet delivered far more than it consumed. This was industrial warfare's new mathematics. Not just armies fighting armies, but scarcity battling surplus. Leaders clawing against oceans of crude oil. German high command understood these numbers. They calculated the Ardennes Offensive needed 4.5 million gallons to reach Antwerp. Only half that amount was allocated. The remainder would come from captured American depots. Operation Watch on the Rhine became more than military strategy. It was a fuel gamble against impossible odds. This desperate wager fell on shoulders like Jochen Piper's, a 30-year-old regimental commander hardened by Eastern Front brutality. To him, the coming offensive meant one thing: a battle measured in gallons. Piper's reputation preceded him across the Wehrmacht. Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords decorated his uniform. His men knew him as a commander who demanded the impossible, and often achieved it. At 30 years old, he led a regiment of the 1st SS Panzer Division, an honor earned through years of savage combat against Soviet forces. His battlefield record spoke of boldness and ruthlessness in equal measure. Yet beneath his steel exterior lay uncomfortable truths. Fuel would decide Germany's fate more than firepower. Every Eastern Front veteran understood this reality. Kampfgruppe Piper embodied both strength and desperation. 67 tanks, including dreaded Tiger IIs. Steel monsters mounting 88mm guns. Weapons that could pierce any Allied armor at killing range. Over 100 half-tracks and trucks carried 5,000 of Germany's most seasoned Waffen-SS soldiers. On paper, this spearhead could shatter enemy lines. In reality, every vehicle shared the same invisible shackle: empty fuel gauges. Staff calculations revealed harsh mathematics. Advancing 65 miles to the Meuse River required over 30,000 gallons for Piper's unit alone. His initial allocation barely covered 50 miles of operations. The rest must be seized from American depots along the way. General Sepp Dietrich didn't sugarcoat orders to subordinates. You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture enemy supplies. Strategy born from necessity rather than confidence. Individual vehicles carried this burden daily. Tiger IIs consumed nearly 3 gallons per mile. Mechanical beasts mocking their own lethality through fuel hunger. Panthers burned 1.5 gallons per mile. Half-tracks and trucks multiplied consumption across the entire convoy. Strict orders mandated engines shut down during halts exceeding 5 minutes. Tanks advanced single file to conserve gasoline. Arithmetic remained unforgiving. Every mile forward wagered against running dry. Still propaganda cloaked the offensive in grand visions. Soldiers heard they would split the Allies, seize Antwerp, force Western powers to negotiating tables. They believed they carried Germany's decisive hope. Piper himself drove them forward with Eastern Front conviction. Perhaps courage and steel might compensate for shortages. But deep down, he knew modern war's harsh truth. Courage without fuel meant nothing. Like swords in an age of guns. This was Kampfgruppe Piper's paradox. Germany's elite soldiers, deadliest tanks, most aggressive commander, all balanced precariously on fragile gasoline supplies. When they rolled out December 16, 1944, they carried more than weapons. They bore impossible expectations of turning scarcity into victory. Within days, those expectations would meet industrial arithmetic's unforgiving reality. Artillery thunder shook the Ardennes at dawn, December 16th. Operation Watch on the Rhine's opening barrage was deafening. More shells fired in 2 hours than some divisions received for entire campaigns. For Kampfgruppe Piper, this meant advance. Engines rumbled alive. Columns of steel rolled onto narrow country roads. Germany's last great Western offensive began. Reality clashed with vision from the first miles. Maps showed highways, but muddy lanes and frozen trails awaited. Tiger IIs designed for sweeping battles struggled through thick forest terrain. Traffic jams snarled advances as vehicles built for Russian steppes fought for passage along village streets, barely cart-wide. Engines idled for hours, burning gallons Germany couldn't afford losing. Piper's orders were clear: no engine running longer than 5 minutes during halts. Necessity ignored these commands. Cold air bit through armor. Tanks needed warmth to restart. Every exhaust puff consumed another precious liter. Resistance appeared where none was expected. At Lanzerath, a single American reconnaissance platoon delayed Piper's armored juggernaut nearly 10 hours. 18 men holding back steel monsters. German planners calculated rapid breakthroughs. Instead, they faced stubborn defense pockets, draining both time and fuel. By dawn, December 17th, the column reached Hansfeld, having covered only 20 miles. 40% of allocated fuel already gone. Hansfeld's capture seemed like divine intervention. American troops fled in haste, leaving hot coffee on mess tables. Fires still smoldered in waste barrels. Most importantly, rows of olive-drab jerry cans lined depot areas. 50,000 gallons abandoned as if worthless. Piper's men erupted in celebration, believing salvation had arrived. Scarcity's specter lifted temporarily. Tanks drank deep from American reserves. Optimism surged as the spearhead advanced again. But miles away, American engineers prepared devastating responses. At Stavelot, 2 million gallons stacked across 15 acres awaited torch orders. As German lead elements approached at 4:30 p.m. December the 17th, U.S. troops ignited the stockpile. Fireballs roared skyward. Black smoke visible for miles. 3 days of flames consumed enough fuel to carry Piper's entire division to Antwerp and back again. For Germans who fought over every jerrycan, the sight was devastating. For Americans, it was routine denial procedure. This Ardennes march became more than military advance. It was a journey into cruel imbalance. An army clawing for liters, chasing enemies who incinerated oceans without hesitation. Kampfgruppe Piper pressed onward, steel tracks grinding across snow and stone. But war's arithmetic was catching up. Every mile forward reminded them they weren't fighting equal terms. They chased victory mirages powered by fuel already burning into winter sky. December 17th gave way to memories etched in every man's mind under Piper's command. After Hansfeld's capture, his column surged forward, steel tracks grinding frozen ground, engines fueled by captured American gasoline. Tiger tanks roared with renewed life, turrets scanning for prey. For fleeting moments, Operation Watch on the Rhine seemed achievable. Illusions wouldn't last. At Stavelot, salvation towered before them, pyramid stacks of jerry cans rising 3 meters high across 15 acres. 2 million gallons, more than Piper's entire division could consume during the offensive. Enough to guarantee reaching the Meuse, enough to alter battle's fate. Men could see it, smell it, taste victory in cold air. Then American engineers lit their torches. Gasoline trails ignited. White phosphorus grenades cracked. Seconds later, firewalls exploded skyward. Flames shot 100 feet high. Black smoke spiraled upward like funeral pyres for German hopes. 3 days the inferno raged, consuming modern army lifeblood. Piper's tanks halted before towering fire columns. Crews staring in silence. They couldn't believe what they witnessed. Enemy destroying more fuel in minutes than Germany received in months. Shock extended beyond battlefield. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found American shipping manifests in Hansfeld depot offices. They detailed fuel's journey from Texas oil fields across Atlantic, through England, onto trucks bound for front lines. All accomplished in less than 6 weeks. To Germans, measuring supplies by liters and waiting months for deliveries, such abundance was incomprehensible. Private Ernst Keller discovered Stars and Stripes newspapers only 2 days old, celebrating another fuel pipeline opening. Each new line delivered more daily than Germans allocated for entire offensive. This was the Ardennes gamble's climax. What Piper believed was Germany's miracle revealed itself as American triviality. Rounding errors in industrial machinery. Men who cheered at Hansfeld fell silent at Stavelot. They realized they fought not just soldiers, but oceans of industry. Americans could burn millions without hesitation, while Germans clung desperately to every can. Despair deepened as Piper's column pushed onward. Fuel consumption spiked in harsh terrain. Tigers drained nearly 3 gallons per mile. Panthers 1.5 gallons. Within 3 days, Kampfgruppe Piper captured 55,000 gallons but consumed 67,000, already running deficit, racing toward exhaustion faster than advance. Abandoned tanks began littering roadsides, not from enemy fire, but empty fuel tanks. Worse still, desperation gave rise to atrocity. At Malmedy, Piper's men massacred 84 American prisoners. Later, he would claim fuel shortages prevented sparing gasoline for transporting captives. Whether excuse or truth, it underscored brutality born from scarcity. Fuel dictated not just movement, but morality itself. As December 18th and 19th unfolded, American pilots returned to skies. C-47 transports delivered more fuel to besieged Bastogne than Piper possessed for his entire column. Allied fighter bombers strafed supply lines, torching convoys that might have delivered relief. Meanwhile, Piper's radio intercepts confirmed Allies knew his weakness. Enemy critically short of fuel, destroy all stocks threatened by capture. The net tightened relentlessly. By December 20th, truth was undeniable. Piper had perhaps 8,000 gallons remaining. Barely enough for one engagement or retreat. Not both. The Meuse lay 30 kilometers away, but his tanks could travel only 20. His men looked for orders, but he could only acknowledge impossibility. They were trapped in battles where courage and steel were irrelevant. The deciding factor was liquid measured not in barrels, but oceans they didn't possess. Climax had arrived. Not as firefight or tank duel in snow, but as sight of fire consuming millions of gallons, smell of gasoline burning away in cold air, realization that war itself was already lost. Germany's last offensive had run on fumes, and fumes were vanishing into smoke. Heavy snow fell over Ardennes, December 21st, 1944, as Kampfgruppe Piper reached its breaking point. The once proud spearhead of 6th SS Panzer Army was now a column of abandoned steel. Tanks stood silent in fields and villages, not destroyed by Allied shells, but paralyzed by empty fuel tanks. Of 119 armored vehicles beginning the offensive, fewer than 40 remained operational. Even they couldn't move. Tigers, Germany's most feared weapons, had become immobile monuments of futility. The contrast had grown unbearable. American units surrounding Piper's pocket had allocations of hundreds of thousands of gallons for single days. Patton's Third Army pivoted north in redeployment, consuming 350,000 gallons in 3 days. Operations Germans couldn't attempt in 3 months. For Piper's men, every liter was counted, every canister guarded, every drop fought over. To Americans, gasoline was so plentiful it fueled field stoves. Trucks ran idle through nights, even wasteful bonfires. Collapse came swiftly. With supplies cut, Allied aircraft roamed freely once skies cleared. December 23rd brought more than 2,000 sorties pummeling German positions. Each plane consumed more fuel hourly than Piper had in reserve. That same night, realizing futility, Piper ordered vehicle abandonment. Engines were drained of final drops. Tanks sabotaged. Guns spiked. 5,000 men had marched forward in triumph. Fewer than 800 trudged back on foot through snow and darkness. Human toll was devastating. Soldiers who believed themselves Europe's elite now faced hunger, exhaustion, and despair. Letters intercepted by Allied censors revealed psychological collapse. They burn more fuel daily than we see monthly. How can we fight such abundance? Prisoners told interrogators that witnessing Americans destroying millions of gallons broke morale more than artillery barrages. Courage faltered when confronted with oil oceans. Strategically, Kampfgruppe Piper's failure unraveled the Ardennes gamble entirely. German High Command had wagered the Reich's last reserves on capturing Allied depots. Instead, they lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, over 1,000 aircraft in 6-week battle. More crushing than numbers was recognition that logistics, not valor, had sealed their fate. The Wehrmacht attempted fighting modern war with horse-drawn wagons and synthetic fuel plants reduced to rubble. Their adversary possessed pipelines, refineries, and convoys that never ceased. Aftermath reverberated beyond battlefield. For German commanders, the message was unmistakable. The war was lost. General Hasso von Manteuffel, who led 5th Panzer Army, admitted later, "When I learned Americans destroyed 8 million gallons, rather than risk capture, I knew the offensive failed before beginning." Even Joseph Goebbels, master propagandist, confessed in diary entries to growing morale problems as soldiers wrote home about American abundance. German superiority myths couldn't survive contact with Allied logistics, so the Ardennes Offensive launched with ambitions of splitting allies and forcing peace ended in retreat and ruin. For Jochen Piper, the man chosen to embody Germany's last hope realization was personal and devastating. Every decision after December 17th had been shaped not by tactics or bravery, but by gasoline scarcity. In the end, enemy fire didn't stop his tanks. Engine silence starved of fuel did. Cold truth that modern wars are decided not only by courage, but by ceaseless oil flow. Kampfgruppe Piper's wreckage didn't vanish with 1944's snow. Its legacy remained preserved in abandoned tanks, soldiers' letters, and memories of failed gambles. For Germany, the Ardennes wasn't just battlefield defeat. It was revelation. War had shifted beyond courage and tactics to realms where industry and logistics held final words. Tiger tanks left behind in Belgian villages became symbolic. These were machines feared across continents. Thick armor, lethal guns. Yet they sat silent not from enemy shells but dry fuel tanks. Visitors today at Le Glaise Museum see one of Piper's own Tigers still standing, its gauge fixed on empty. A monument not to combat, but arithmetic. Industrial warfare equations Germany couldn't solve. For men who fought discovering American abundance, shattered illusions. Prisoners told interrogators, "You throw away chocolate we haven't seen in years. You burn fuel we guard with divisions. How can we fight this?" German officers wrote candidly in letters, "We cannot fight infinity." Morale didn't collapse from battlefield defeats alone, but because soldiers witnessed first-hand supply, oceans sustaining their enemy. Their own hardship was dwarfed by sheer Allied capacity scale. Historians later calculated staggering imbalance. December 1944, Germany allocated just 5 million gallons to Ardennes Offensive. Same period, American forces consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100-to-1 ratio. While Germans measured survival in liters, Americans measured victory in reserves so vast they could afford destroying millions without hesitation. This disparity, not battlefield tactics, doomed Hitler's last gamble. Lessons endure beyond Ardennes. In modern war, logistics isn't backdrop. It is the battlefield itself. Factories, refineries, and convoys decide outcomes more than generals and strategies. Courage may inspire, but cannot move armies without fuel. The story of Jochen Piper's 50,000 gallons reveals World War II's true weapon wasn't tank or plane, but barrel of oil. The Ardennes Offensive enters history not merely as Germany's last counterattack, but as moment when industrial warfare declared its verdict. Romantic visions of victory through daring maneuvers died in burning depot smoke. Future belonged to nations that could outproduce outsupply and outlast enemies. In this, Germany never had a chance. Kampfgruppe Piper's tanks rust as monuments, mute reminders of truth stark as Belgian winter. Wars aren't won by steel alone, but by fuel rivers that keep steel alive. The fuel gauge needle remains frozen at empty. December 1944. Belgian hills holding secrets that reshaped history forever. Steel beasts silenced not by courage or tactics, but by something far simpler and far more decisive. Industrial arithmetic written in gallons and barrels. Mathematics of modern warfare where abundance matters more than bravery. Where logistics decides fate more than heroism. This was the moment the Third Reich discovered it was fighting a different war entirely. Measuring in liters while enemies measured in oceans. The terrible arithmetic that sealed Germany's doom.